Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Adventure Mystery Book Club. My name is Bill Mallory, and I'm the branch manager of the La Jolla Library. I'm so glad you could join me today for our reading today of Treasure Island. And today we'll be reading chapters 12, 13, and 14. So just a brief recap on what we have read last week and a little bit before that. A very surly, bad pirate has taken refuge in the Admiral Benbow Inn, which is run by Jim Hawkins and his family. And he has always been on the lookout for others of his kind, other pirates, especially a one-legged seafaring man. And he eventually, they find him at the Admiral Benbow and give him the black spot, a a black spot written on a sheet of paper that is meant to be kind of a calling card of these nefarious people. And while the bad pirate, whose name is Billy Bones, passes away from the shock of this and also from excessive rum drinking, the Jim Hawkins and his mother go through his chest, his treasure, his booty chest, basically, to get back the money that they are owed from him, and they find a packet in oilskin, and Jim sticks it in his shirt. And when they hear the other pirates are about to or knocking on their door, as soon as they leave, uh, Jim Hawkins and his mother run. They open the door. Go out the front door of the Admiral Benbow Inn. They run to town and try to get help. No one is willing to help them there because they're all afraid of the pirates. They all know that this particular bunch, which seems to be the former crew of a scallywag by the name of Captain Flint, uh, who is now deceased, but apparently his men are out and about, of which Billy Bones was one, and they find they find that no one will help them. Although, excuse me, ooh, one person says that they will go in and get help for them. So they go back and see that the pirates have returned to the inn. They've broken down the door. They're looking for everything. They're smashing the place up, and they find the money that Billy Bones had in the chest. And many of them are okay with that. They're fine with, hey, we got the money. We're good. But the lead pirate, in this case, a man named Blind Pew, knows that there is more than that, and he wants that. He wants the money is nothing. He says. He says the map and the treasure that the map leads to is the real prize. Well, the at this time the constables arrive. The pirates scatter. Blind Pew is run over by one of the constable's horses by accident. But he is no more. Blind Pew is deceased at this point, and the uh, the constabulary basically help Jim Hawkins and his mother, um, and then while Jim Hawkins is being rescued, he says, "By the way, I need to see Dr. Livesey. He's a magistrate and a physician in town, a very prominent man, and a good friend to the Hawkins family. We've already seen him try to help with the pirate Billy Bones during one of his attacks after having too much rum, and and so he has this oilskin packet. Wants to take it to him. The constables take him over there. Turns out he's at the house of Squire Trelawney, who is a wealthy gentleman in town, and the three of them then open up the oilskin packet, find a book with an account ledger of all the amount of money that they should have and hidden away, along with a map with several of an island with several red X's all over the map, indicating where treasure has been buried. So they get it into their head. They're going to go to Squire Trelawney, who has the money, is going to go to London, and he's going to purchase a ship, a sailing ship. He's going to try and arrange for a crew and a captain, and they are all going to go to this island that is indicated on this map. They have the longitude and the latitude, and so they are ready to go. And of course, and a few weeks later, they find out he has purchased a ship called the Hispaniola, and he has met a fine sailor by the name of John Silver. And not only is John Silver able to be the cook on the Hispaniola, he also knows a lot of sailors who can help be the crew for this voyage. So they all meet up in London, the three of them, Jim Hawkins, Squire Trelawney, and Dr. Livesey, and they are going to begin this adventure, and they get on board the Hispaniola, and they meet the captain. The captain is Captain Smollett, and one of the first things he does is he says he is not happy with this crew. He doesn't like them. He doesn't like the look of them. He doesn't think they may be good sailors, but he doesn't really think they're good people. So he he voices his objections, and Squire Trelawney is mad at him, and he's like, "Oh, I can't believe he said that. Oh, that's just terrible." He doesn't think much of him. Of course, he's a very by the book captain. He wants things to be a certain way. He wants them to be right in his opinion, and he orders Jim Hawkins into to help in the galley, and his sort of brusque, abrupt, somewhat abrasive manner also rubs Jim Hawkins the wrong way, and he doesn't like him either. And yet, however, they, having voiced these opinions and having everyone sort of settle in, they decide to leave and they go on this voyage. And it isn't long before one of Silver's men, a Mr. Arrow, is unable to hold his drink. They don't know where this rum is coming from, but it's coming from somewhere. And he has been getting drunk the entire time. And one morning, he's just gone. They believe he got so drunk he just fell overboard, and that was the end of him. Meanwhile, the ship is going on. These men prove to be otherwise capable sailors, and Jim Hawkins has made friends with John Silver. John Silver has these many flattering things to say about him, and he, at some point during the voyage, Jim Hawkins jumps into an apple barrel because there's a barrel of apples, and of course, you want fresh fruit when you're away from anything else. And so since the barrel was almost empty, he climbs into the barrel to grab one of the last few apples in there, and accidentally overhears a conversation between Long John Silver and one of the crew members and one of his men who's called Israel Hands. And once they are all alone, they start talking about what they really feel about the ship and the crew and Squire Trelawney and Dr. Livesey and the rest of them, which is, none too flattering. They're really looking forward. I mean, Israel Hands is he's getting very angry at Captain Smollett for ordering them around, and he wants to do his own thing. And it's like, I'm so bad. I want to kill that Captain Smollett. And Long John Silver cautions patience. He says, just wait. What we really want to do, the best thing to do would be to go to the island, pick up all the treasure, plot a course back to England, and while on the way back to England, kill Smollett and maybe Trelawney, maybe Livesey if they need to. And that way they would have the treasure, they would have the ship, and they could sail wherever they wanted to. But He also concedes that Israel Hands is really voicing the opinion of a lot of the crew, and so to placate the rest of the crew, he knows that he says this to him, that he's willing to kill Smollett before, I mean, while they're on the island, or right about the time they leave the island. So even though it's a little earlier than he would like, Long John Silver is perfectly fine with killing Captain Smollett and taking over the ship and mutiny, basically. So Jim Hawkins hears all this. And just as everyone leaves and Jim Hawkins is about to get out of the apple barrel, you hear the words from the crow's nest, "Land ho." And they have found the island. They are at the island. And with that in mind, we can begin chapter 12, which is entitled Council of War. There was a great rush of feet across the deck. I could hear people tumbling up from the cabin and the forecastle, and slipping in an instant outside my barrel, I dived before the foresail and made a double towards the stern, and came out upon the open deck in time to join Hunter and Dr. Livesey in the rush for the weather bow. There all hands were already congregated. A belt of fog had lifted almost simultaneously with the appearance of the moon. Away to the southwest of us we saw two low hills, about a couple of miles apart, and rising between one of them a third and higher hill, whose peak was still buried in the fog. All three seemed sharp and conical in nature. So much I saw, almost in a dream, for I had not yet recovered from my horrid fear of a minute or two before. And then I heard the voice of Captain Smollett issuing orders. The Hispaniola was laid a couple of points nearer the wind, and now sailed a course that would just clear the island on the east. "And now, men," said the captain, when all was sheeted home, "has any one of you ever seen that land ahead?" "I have, sir," said Silver. "I've watered there with a trader I was a cook in." "The anchorage is on the south, behind an islet, I fancy?" asked the captain. "Yes, sir. Skeleton Island, they calls it. It were a main place for pirates once, and a hand we had on board knowed all their names for it. That hill to nor'ward, they call the Four-Mast Hill. There are 3 hills in a row running southward, fore, main, and mizzen, sir. But the main, that's the big un with the cloud on it, they usually calls the Spyglass, by reason of a lookout they kept when they was in anchorage for cleaning. For it's there they cleaned their ships, sir, asking your pardon." "I have a chart here," says Captain Smollett. "See if that's the place." Long John's eyes burned in his head as he took the chart, but by the fresh look of the paper I knew he was doomed to disappointment. This was not the map we found in Billy Bones' chest, but an accurate copy, complete in all things, names and heights and surroundings, with a single exception of the red crosses and the written notes. Sharp as must have been his annoyance, Silver had the strength of mind to hide it. "Yes, sir," said he. "This is the spot, to be sure, and very prettily drawed out. Who might have done that, I wonder? The pirates were too ignorant, I reckon. Aye, here it is. Captain Kidd's anchorage. Just the name my shipmate called it. There's a strong current runs along the south, and then away nor'ward up the west coast. Right you was, sir," says he, "to haul your wind and keep the weather of the island. Leastways, if such was your intention as to enter and careen. And there ain't no better place for that in these waters." "Thank you, my man," says Captain Smollett. "I'll ask you later on to give us help. You may go." I was surprised at the coolness with which John avowed his knowledge of the island, and I own I was half frightened when I saw him drawing nearer to myself. He did not know, to be sure, that I had overheard his counsel from the apple barrel, and yet I had by this time taken such a horror of his cruelty, duplicity, and power, that I could scarce conceal a shudder when he laid his hand upon my arm. "Ah," says he, "this here is a sweet spot, this island. A sweet spot for a lad to get ashore on. You'll bathe, you'll climb trees, and you'll hunt goats, you will. And you'll get aloft on them hills like a goat yourself. Why, it makes me young again. I was going to forget my timber leg, I was. It's a pleasant thing to be young and to have 10 toes, you may lay to that. When you want to go a bit of exploring, just ask old John, and he'll put you up a snack for you to take along." And, clapping me in the friendliest way upon the shoulder, he hobbled off forward and went below. Captain Smollett, the squire, and Dr. Livesey were talking together on the quarter-deck, and, anxious as I was to tell them my story, I durst not interrupt them openly. While I was still casting about in my thoughts to find some probable excuse, Dr. Livesey calls me to his side. He had left his pipe below, and, being a slave to tobacco, that had meant that I should fetch it. But as soon as I was near enough to speak and not be overheard, I broke out immediately. "Doctor, let me speak. Get the captain and squire down to the cabin, and then make some pretense to send for me. I have terrible news." The doctor changed his countenance a little, but next moment he was master of himself. "Thank you, Jim," said he, quite loudly. "That was all I wanted to know," as if he had asked me a question. And with that he turned on his heel and rejoined the other two. They spoke together for a little, and though none of them started or raised his voice or so much as whistled, it was plain enough that Dr. Livesey had communicated my request. For the next thing that I heard was the captain giving an order to Job Anderson, and all hands were piped on deck. "My lads," said Captain Smollett, "I've a word to say to you. This land that we have sighted is the place where we've been sailing to. Mr. Trelawney, being a very open-handed gentleman, as we all know, has just asked me a word or two, and as I was able to tell him that every man on board had done his duty, alow and aloft, as I never asked to see it done better, why, he and I," said the doctor, "are going below to the cabin to drink your health and luck, and you'll have grog served out for you to drink our health and luck. I'll tell you what I think of this. I think it's handsome, and if you think as I do, you'll give a good sea cheer for the gentleman that does it." The cheer followed. That was a matter of course, but it rang out so full and hearty that I confess I could hardly believe these same men were plotting for our blood. "One more cheer for Captain Smollett," cried Long John, when the first had subsided. And this was also given with a will. On the top of that, the three gentlemen went below, and, not long after, word was sent forward that Jim Hawkins was wanted in the cabin. I found them all three seated round the table, a bottle of Spanish wine and some raisins before them, and the doctor smoking away, with his wig on his lap, and that, I knew, was a sign that he was agitated. The stern window was open, for it was a warm night, and you could see the moon shining behind on the ship's wake. "Now, Hawkins," said the squire, "you have something to say? Speak up." I did as I was bid, and, as short as I could make it, told the whole details of Silver's conversation. Nobody interrupted me until I was done, nor did any one of the three men make so much as a movement, but they kept their eyes upon my face from first to last. "Jim," said Dr. Livesey, "take a seat." And they made me sit down at table behind them, poured me out a glass of wine, filled my hands with raisins, and all three, one after the other, and each with a bow, drank to my good health, and their service to me for my luck and courage. "Now, captain," said the squire, "you were right, and I was wrong. I own myself an ass, and I await your orders." "No more an ass than I, sir," returned the captain. "I never heard of a crew that meant to mutiny, but what showed signs before, for any man that had an eye in his head to see the mischief and take steps according. But this crew," he added, "beats me." "Captain," said the doctor, "with your permission, that's Silver, a very remarkable man." "He'd look remarkably well from a yardarm, sir," returned the captain. "But this is talk. This don't lead to anything. I see 3 or 4 points, and with Mr. Trelawney's permission, I'll name them." "You, sir, are the captain. It is for you to speak," said Mr. Trelawney grandly. "First point," began Mr. Smollett, "we must go on, because we can't turn back. If I gave the word to go about, they would rise at once. Second point, we have time before us, at least, until this treasure's found. Third point, there are faithful hands. Now, sir, it's got to come to blows sooner or later, and what I propose is to take time by the forelock, as the saying is, and come to blows some fine day when they least expect it. We can count, I take it, on your own home servants, Mr. Trelawney." "As upon myself," declared the squire. "3," reckoned the captain. "Ourselves make 7, counting Hawkins here. Now, how about the honest hands?" "Most likely Trelawney's own men," said the doctor. "Those he had picked up for himself before he lit on Silver." "Nay," replied the squire, "Hands was one of mine." "I did think I could have trusted Hands," added the captain. "And to think that they're all Englishmen," broke out the squire. "Sir, I could find it in my heart to blow the ship up." "Well, gentlemen," said the captain, "the best that I can say is not much. Best that I can say is not much. We must lay to, if you please, and keep a bright lookout. It's trying on a man, I know, but it would be pleasanter to come to blows, but there's no help for it till we know our men. Lay to, and whistle for a wind. That's my view." "Jim here," said the doctor, "can help us more than anyone. The men are not shy with him, and Jim is a noticing lad." "Hawkins, I put prodigious faith in you," added the squire. I began to feel pretty desperate at this, for I felt altogether helpless, and yet, by an odd train of circumstances, it was indeed through me that safety came. In the meantime, talk as we pleased, there were only 7 out of the 26 on whom we could rely, and out of these 7, one was a boy, so that the grown men on our side were 6 to their 19. This is the end of part 2. We are now in part 3, which is entitled My Shore Adventure. Chapter 13, How I Began My Shore Adventure. The appearance of the island when I came on deck next morning was altogether changed. Although the breeze had now utterly failed, we had made a great deal of way during the night, and were now laying becalmed about half a mile to the southeast of the low eastern coast. Gray-colored woods covered a large part of the surface. This even tint was indeed broken up by streaks of yellow sandbrake in the lower lands, and by many tall trees of the pine family, out-topping the others, some singly, some in clumps, but the general coloring was uniform and sad. The hills ran up clear above the vegetation in spires of naked rock. All were strangely shaped, and the spyglass, which was by 300 or 400 feet the tallest on the island, was likewise the strangest in configuration, running up sheer from almost every side and then suddenly cut off at the top like a pedestal to put a statue on. The Hispaniola was rolling scuppers under the ocean swell. The booms were tearing at the blocks, the rudder was banging to and fro, and the whole ship creaking, groaning, and jumping like a manufactory. I had to cling tight to the backstay, and the world turned giddily before my eyes. For though I was a good enough sailor when there was way on, this standing still and being rolled about like a bottle was a thing I never learned to stand without a qualm or so. Above all, in the morning, on an empty stomach. Perhaps it was this. Perhaps it was the look of the island with its gray, melancholy woods and wild stone spires, and the surf that we would both see and hear foaming and thundering on the steep beach. At least, although the sun shone bright and hot, and the shore birds were fishing and crying all around us, and you would have thought anyone would have been glad to get to land after being so long at sea. My heart sank, as the saying is, into my boots, and from that first look onward, I hated the very thought of Treasure Island. We had a dreary morning's work before us, for there was no sign of any wind, and the boats had to be got out and manned, and the ship warped 3 or 4 miles around the corner of the island, and up the narrow passage to the haven behind Skeleton Island. I volunteered for one of the boats, where I had, of course, no business. The heat was sweltering, and the men grumbled fiercely over their work. Anderson was in command of my boat, and instead of keeping the crew in order, he grumbled as loud as the worst. "Well," he said, with an oath, "it's not forever." I thought this was a very bad sign, for, up to that day, the men had gone briskly and willingly about their business, but the very sight of the island had relaxed the cords of discipline. All the way in, Long John stood by the steersman and conned the ship. He knew the passage like the palm of his hand, and though the man in the chains got everywhere more water than was down in the chart, John never hesitated once. "There's a strong scour with the ebb," he said, "and this here passage has been dug out, in a manner of speaking, with a spade." We brought up just where the anchor was in the chart, about a third of a mile from either shore, the mainland on one side and Skeleton Island on the other. The bottom was clean sand. The plunge of our anchor set up clouds of birds, wheeling and crying over the woods, but in less than a minute they were down again, and all was once more silent. The place was entirely landlocked, buried in woods, the trees coming right down to high water mark, the shores mostly flat, and the hilltops standing round at a distance in a short amphitheater, one here, one there. 2 little rivers, or rather 2 swamps, emptied out into this pond, as you might call it, and the foliage round that part of the shore had a kind of poisonous brightness. From the ship we could see nothing of the house or stockade, for they were quite buried among trees. And if it had not been for the chart on the companion, we might have been the first that had ever anchored there since the island arose out of the seas. There was not a breath of air moving, nor a sound but that of the surf booming half a mile away along the beaches and against the rocks outside. A peculiar, stagnant smell hung over the anchorage, a smell of sodden leaves and rotting tree trunks. I observed the doctor sniffing and sniffing like someone tasting a bad egg. "I don't know about treasure," he said, but I'll stake my wig. There's fever here. If the conduct of the men had been alarming in the boat, it became truly threatening when they had come aboard. They lay about the deck, growling together in talk. The slightest order was received with a black look, and grudgingly and carelessly obeyed. Even the honest hands must have caught the infection, for there was not one man aboard to mend another. Mutiny, it was plain, hung over us like a thundercloud. And it was not only we of the cabin party who perceived the danger. Long John was hard at work going from group to group, spending himself in good advice, and as, for example, no man could have shown a better. He fairly outstripped himself in willingness and civility. He was all smiles to everyone. If an order were given, John would be on his crutch in an instant, with the cheeriest "Aye, aye, sir," in the world. And when there was nothing else to do, he kept up one song after another, as if to conceal the discontent of the rest. Of all the gloomy features of that gloomy afternoon, this obvious anxiety on the part of Long John appeared the worst. We held a council in the cabin. "Sir," said the captain, "if I risk another order, the whole ship'll come about our ears on by the run. You see, sir, here it is. I get a rough answer, do I not? Well, if I speak back, Pikes will be going in 2 shakes. If I don't, Silver will see there's something under that, and the game's up. Now, we've only one man to rely on." "And who is that?" asked the squire. "Silver, sir," returned the captain. "He's as anxious as you and I to smother things up. This is a tiff. He'd soon talk him out of it if he had the chance, and what I propose to do is give him the chance. Let's allow the men an afternoon ashore. If they all go, why, we'll fight the ship. If none of them go, well, then, we hold the cabin, and God defend the right. If some go, you mark my words, sir, Silver'll bring 'em aboard again as mild as lambs." It was so decided. Loaded pistols were served out to all the shore men. Hunter, Joyce, and Redruth were taken into our confidence, and received the news with less surprise and a better spirit than we had looked for, and then the captain went on deck and addressed the crew. "My lads," said he, "we've had a hot day, and are all tired and out of sorts. A turn ashore'll hurt nobody. The boats are still in the water. You can take the gigs, and as many as you please can go ashore for the afternoon. I'll fire a gun half an hour before sundown." I believe the silly fellows must have thought they would break their shins over treasure as soon as they were landed, for they all came out of their sulks in a moment and gave a cheer that started the echo in a faraway hill, and sent the birds once more flying and squalling around the anchorage. The captain was too bright to be in the way. He whipped out of sight in a moment, leaving Silver to arrange the party, and I fancy it was as well he did so. He had been on deck. He could no longer so much as have pretended not to understand the situation. It was as plain as day. Silver was the captain, and a mighty rebellious crew he had of it. The honest hands, and I was soon to see it proved that there were such on board, must have been very stupid fellows, or rather, I suppose the truth was this, that all hands were disaffected by the example of the ringleaders. Only some more than some less, and a few, being good fellows in the main, could neither be led nor driven any further. It is one thing to be idle and skulk, and quite another to take a ship and murder a number of innocent men. At last, however, the party was made up. 6 fellows were to stay on board, and the remaining 13, including Silver, began to disembark. Then it was that there came into my head the first of the mad notions that contributed so much to save our lives. If 6 men were left by Silver, it was plain our party could not take and fight the ship, and since only 6 were left, it was equally plain that the cabin party had no present need of my assistance. It occurred to me at once to go ashore. In a jiffy, I had slipped over the side and curled up in the foresheets of the nearest boat, and almost at the same moment she shoved off. No one took notice of me, only the bow oar saying, "Is that you, Jim? Keep your head down." But Silver from the other boat looked sharply over and called out to know if that were me, and from that moment I began to regret what I had done. The crews raced for the beach, but the boat I was in, having some start and being at once the lighter and the better manned, shot far ahead of her consort, and the bow had struck among the shore-tide trees, and I caught a branch and swung myself out, and plunged into the nearest thicket, while Silver and the rest were still 100 yards behind. "Jim! Jim!" I heard him shouting. But you may suppose I paid no heed. Jumping, ducking, and breaking through, I ran straight before my nose till I could run no longer. Chapter 14, entitled The First Blow. I was so pleased at having given the slip to Long John that I began to enjoy myself and look around me with some interest on the strange land that I was in. I had crossed a marshy tract full of willows, bulrushes, and odd, outlandish, swampy trees, and I had now come out upon the skirts of an open piece of undulating sandy country, about a mile long, dotted with a few pines, and a great number of contorted trees, not unlike the oak in growth, but pale in the foliage, like willows. On the far side of the open stood one of the hills, with 2 quaint, craggy peaks shining vividly in the sun. I now felt for the first time the joy of exploration. The isle was uninhabited. My shipmates I had left behind, and nothing lived in front of me but dumb brutes and fowls. I turned hither and thither among the trees. Here and there were flowering plants unknown to me. Here and there I saw snakes, and one raised its head from a ledge of rock and hissed at me with a noise not unlike the spinning of a top. Little did I suppose that he was a deadly enemy, and that the noise was the famous rattle. Then I came to a long thicket of these oak-like trees, live or evergreen oaks, I heard afterwards they should be called, which grew low along the sand like brambles, the boughs curiously twisted, the foliage compact like thatch. The thicket stretched down from the top of one of the sandy knolls, spreading and growing taller as it went, until it reached the margin of the broad, reedy fen, through which the nearest of the little rivers soaked its way into the anchorage. The marsh was steaming in the strong sun, and the outline of the spyglass trembled through the haze. All at once there began to be a sort of bustle among the bulrushes. A wild duck flew up with a quack. Another followed, and soon over the whole surface of the marsh a great cloud of birds hung screaming and circling in the air. I judged at once that some of my shipmates must be drawing near along the borders of the fen. Nor was I deceived, for soon I heard the very distant and low tones of a human voice, which I continued to give ear, grew steadily louder and louder. This put me in a great fear, and I crawled under cover of the nearest live oak, and squatted there, hearkening, as silent as a mouse. Another voice answered. Then the first voice, which I now recognized to be Silver's, once more took up the story, and ran on for a long while in a stream, only now and again interrupted by the other. By the sound, they must have been talking earnestly and almost fiercely, but no distinct word came to my hearing. At last the speaker seemed to have paused and perhaps to have sat down, for not only did they cease to draw any nearer, but the birds themselves began to grow more quiet and to settle again to their places in the swamp. And now I began to feel that I was neglecting my business, that since I had been so foolhardy as to come ashore with these desperadoes, at least the least I could do was to overhear them at their councils, and that my plain and obvious duty was to draw as close as I could manage, under the favorable ambush of the crouching trees. I could tell the direction of the speakers pretty exactly, not only by the sound of their voices, but by the behavior of the few birds that still hung in alarm above the heads of the intruders. Crawling on all fours, I made steadily but slowly toward them, till at last, raising my head to an aperture among the leaves, I could see clear down into a little green dell beside the marsh, and closely set about with trees, where Long John Silver and another of the crew stood face to face in conversation. The sun beat full upon them. Silver had thrown his hat beside him on the ground, and his great, smooth, blond face, all shining with heat, was lifted to the other man's in a kind of appeal. "Mate," he was saying, "it's because I thinks gold dust of you. Gold dust, and you may lay to that. If I hadn't took to you like pitch, do you think I'd have been here a warning of you? All's up. You can't make nor mend. It's to save your neck that I'm a speaking. And if one of the wild uns knew it, where would I be then, Tom? Now tell me, where would I be?" "Silver," said the other man, and I observed he was not only red in the face, but spoke as hoarse as a crow, and his voice shook, too, like a taut rope. "Silver," says he, "you're old, and you're honest, or has the name for it, and you've money, too, which lots of poor sailors hasn't, and you're brave, or I'm mistook. But will you tell me you'll let yourself be led away with that kind of a mess of swabs? Not you. As sure as God sees me, I'd sooner lose my hand, and if I turn again my duty." And then all of a sudden he was interrupted by a noise, and I found one of the honest hands. Well, here at that same time came news of another. Far away in the marsh there arose all of a sudden a sound like a cry of anger, then another on the back of it, and then one horrid, long-drawn scream. The rocks of the spyglass re-echoed it ashore. It re-echoed it a score, rather, of times. The whole troop of marsh birds rose again, darkening heaven with a simultaneous whir. And long after that death yell was still ringing in my brain, silence had re-established its empire, and only the rustle of the redescending birds and the boom of the distant surges disturbed the languor of the afternoon. Tom had leapt at the sound like a horse at the spur, but Silver had not winked an eye. He stood where he was, resting lightly on his crutch, watching his companion like a snake about to spring. "John," said the sailor, stretching out his hand. "Hands off," cried Silver, leaping back a yard, as it seemed to me, with the speed and security of a trained gymnast. "Hands off, if you like, John Silver," said the other. "It's a black conscience that can make you feared of me. But in heaven's name, tell me what was that?" "That?" returned Silver, smiling away, but warier than ever, his eye a mere pinpoint in that face, but gleaming like a crumb of glass. That? Oh, I reckon that'll be Alan. And at this, poor Tom flashed out like a hero. Alan? He cried. Then rest his soul for a true seaman. As for you, John Silver, long you've been a mate of mine, but you're a mate of mine no more. And if I die like a dog, I'll die in my duty. You've killed Alan Heaven, have you? Kill me too, if you can, but I defies you. And with that, this brave fellow turned his back directly on the cook and set off walking for the beach. But he was not destined to go far. With a cry, John seized the branch of a tree, whipped the crutch out of his armpit, and sent that uncouth missile hurtling through the air. It struck poor Tom, point foremost and with a stunning violence, right between the shoulders, in the middle of his back. His hands flew up, he gave a sort of gasp, and fell. Whether he were injured, much or little, none could ever tell. Like enough to judge from the sound, his back was broken on the spot. But he had no time given him to recover. Silver, agile as a monkey, even without his leg or crutch, was on the top of him the next moment, and had twice buried his knife up to the hilt in that defenseless body. From my place of ambush, I could hear him pant aloud as he struck the blows. I do not know what it rightly is to faint, but I do know that for the next little while the whole world swam away from before me in a whirling mist. Silver and the birds and the tall spyglass hilltop going around and round and topsy-turvy before my eyes, and all manner of bells ringing and distant voices shouting in my ears. When I came again to myself, the monster had pulled himself together, his crutch under his arm, his hat upon his head. Just before him, Tom lay motionless on the sward, but the murderer minded him not a whit, cleansing his blood-stained knife the while upon a wisp of grass. Everything else was unchanged, the sun still shining mercilessly on the streaming marsh and the tall pinnacle of the mountain, and I could scarce persuade myself that murder had been actually done, and a human life cruelly cut short a moment since before my eyes. But now John put his hand into his pocket, brought out a whistle, and blew upon it several modulated blasts that rang far across the heated air. I could not tell, of course, the meaning of the signal, but it instantly awoke my fears. More men would be coming. I might be discovered. They had already slain 2 of the honest people. After Tom and Alan, might not I be come next? Instantly I began to extricate myself and crawl back again, with what speed and silence I could manage, to the more open portion of the wood. As I did so, I could hear hails coming and going between the old buccaneer and his comrades, and this sound of danger lent me wings. As soon as I was clear of the thicket, I ran as I never ran before, scarce minding the direction of my flight, so long as it led me from the murderers. And as I ran, fear grew and grew upon me until it turned into a kind of frenzy. Indeed, could anyone be more entirely lost than I? When the gun fired, how should I dare to go down to the boats among those fiends, still smoking from their crime? Would not the first of them who saw me wring my neck like a snipe's? Would not my absence itself be an evidence to them of my alarm, and therefore of my fatal knowledge? It was all over, I thought. Goodbye to the Hispaniola, goodbye to the squire, the doctor, and the captain. There was nothing left for me but death by starvation or death by the hands of all of the mutineers. All this while, as I say, I was still running, and without taking any notice, I had drawn near to the foot of the little hill with the two peaks, and had gone into a part of the island where the live oaks grew more widely apart, and seemed more like forest trees in their bearing and dimensions. Mingled with these were a few scattered pines, some 50, some nearer 70 feet high. The air, too, smelt more freshly than of more freshly than down beside the marsh. And here a fresh alarm brought me to a standstill with a thumping heart. And that's the end of chapter 14. What fresh alarm has gotten to Jim's senses, to his mind? What is he alarmed about? I guess we'll have to find out. I hope you can join me again in 2 days on Wednesday. What is it? September 2nd at 4 p.m. We'll be back again with another 3 chapters from Treasure Island. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you're reading along, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Bye, everyone.